I have a couple of slides here today to bring you through our story from BP Launchpad. So I hope you'll find it interesting. It's been a wild ride for us since we've started, almost around 3 years ago now. So lots of lessons learned. So hopefully you all find something interesting in the talk. So I wanted to just kind of set the scene for BP Launchpad, where we are in terms of BP as a company. I'm sure you're all very familiar with it. It itself has had a very tumultuous last 12 months, and it essentially has set a new course in its direction. And so that context is hugely important for the work that I do and the work that we do in Launchpad. And it puts all of the things that we're doing and why we're doing it into context. So I wanted to share that with you to start things off. So the purpose of BP has shifted. They're moving from where they were to a whole new direction, which is about reimagining energy for people, for the planet, and ultimately the ambition to become a net zero company, which, for an oil company is a big, big ambition, which essentially means you're going to have to change and transform your whole business. So no mean feat, and that's designed to be done by 2050 or sooner. To align us, or to align BP to that strategy, there's a bunch of aims that we have set out to direct this strategy, which I'm going to bring you through, because each of them are important, and each of them are actually metrics, and each of them tie into the type of things that I'm looking at in Launchpad and the type of companies and businesses that we're trying to build. So BP is moving from an international oil company that's producing resources, which is what it has been for over 100 years, to moving to an integrated energy company delivering solutions for customers. So that is a big switch and a big shift. So driving that strategy, there's six main things. Firstly, that the world is going to electrify, and that renewables are going to be a clear winner in that. And that has huge implications for the world, for the energy system, power grids, for the way we live our lives, and the type of business that all of the energy companies are going to have to move into. Second is that customers are going to redefine convenience and mobility, and that's going to be driven by the electrification, digital, and fleet. So the way that customers are going to be interacting with the energy world is going to completely change. Third is that oil and gas will be challenged, and its nature will change, and its strength will change, but it is undoubtedly going to remain part of the energy mix for decades. That should not be controversial. That should be a straightforward statement, and it is going to be a necessary part of the transition as we get to a higher renewable share of reliable energy. Fourth is that energy systems are going to become increasingly complex. They're going to be multi-technology, integrated, and local. So the complexity is going to increase for it to be able to operate efficiently. So that means we will need a deep understanding of what that's going to look like for us able to then be able to react and to build businesses that can fit into that matrix, as well as act as a company in that way as well. Number 5, customers, countries, cities, industries, and corporates, they're all going to demand bespoke energy solutions. And number 6, digital. This should not come as a shock. It's going to continue to transform our lives. It's going to keep driving innovation, unlock value, and engaging customers and markets. So these are the 6 things that have driven the new direction and the new strategy. So the first 5 aims of this new direction of where BP is going are probably the most notable, although they all have their weight. And these relate generally to direct emissions reductions from the core operations of oil and gas. So these might be the ones that you've heard the most about, and the ones that would have gotten the most attention. So our first aim is to be net zero across the entire operations on an absolute basis by 2050 or sooner. So this is the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions reduction. Our second aim is again around emissions, which is to be net zero on an absolute basis across the carbon in the upstream oil and gas by 2050. So this stretches out to scope 3. Our third aim is to cut the carbon intensity of the products we sell by 50% or more. So this is around the life cycle carbon intensity approach per unit of energy. Our fourth aim is around reducing methane. And this is to install methane measurements at all our existing oil and gas sites by 2023, publishing that data and then driving reduction in it. So that's all about transparency in the emissions and the emissions reduction. Aim number 5 is the big one for the type of business that I'm in at Launchpad, which is to increase the proportion of investments we make into our non-oil and gas businesses. So this is big part of the transition, is pushing away from the core investments and core strategy into the new parts of the business, which are going to be more non-oil and gas focused parts of the business. Some other aims which are also important: advocation. Aim 6 is to be actively advocating for policies that support net zero, including carbon pricing, which we are an advocate of. Incentivizing employees. BP has a massive global workforce, so really that aim number 7 is about bringing the whole company into the push towards net zero, and we've even created an investment share scheme to actually tie employees into that. Aim 8, this is around our expectations for trade associations around the globe. Aim number 9, we want to become recognized as an industry leader for the transparency of our reporting and take the initiative. Aim number 10 is about our acknowledgement of the importance of cities and corporates that are going to be part of the energy transition. So this is to launch a new team to create integrated clean energy solutions and mobility solutions. We've stood up a new business unit called Region, Cities and Solutions in 2020, and the aim of this unit is to directly focus on the needs of cities, which is going to be increasingly important. There's more aims here, which it gets into more around improving people's lives, around clean energy for people, an energy transition that acknowledges human rights and education, and about diversity and inclusion. I'm just putting these here just so you can cast your eye over them, but they all stand up in terms of their own importance and do drive the work that we're doing and show the change that's going on in the company. There's some final aims here which are around caring for the planet, which is around enhanced biodiversity, a focus on becoming water positive, championing nature-based solutions, so climate-based solutions, and the focus on that. Again, that is huge in that it ties into the type of investments that we are looking at in Launchpad. Similarly, unlocking circularity. So a focus on really looking into the value that can be unlocked through circularity, which is again an area of interest for us in Launchpad. And the final aim around a sustainable supply chain and what that means. And again, there's investment opportunities in there, which is part of our investment thesis in Launchpad, which I will get to a little bit later in that section. So ultimately, the strategy is to change the business. It's to continue to have an element of hydrocarbons that are resilient and focused, and that the cash flows from those activities will enable the strategy to invest into the growth areas, which is the low carbon electricity and energy and the convenience and mobility. BP's structure as a group has changed in the last year, and this is currently how it's set up, with 3 main areas, which I mentioned, which is going to be the low carbon electricity and energy, which is going to be the renewables push, convenience and mobility, which is going to be around the focus on the customer, which will involve things like electric vehicles and the charging networks. And then, of course, the core business of the resilient and focused hydrocarbons, which will still be an element of the business going forward. This graph, just to give you a visual on some of the key metrics that are going to be tracked to get us from where we are today to where we hope to be going forward. So this shows you out towards 2030, the aims are pushing. So you can see the top line, a big push in developed renewables and traded electricity from 2.5 gigawatts today to 50 gigawatts by 2030, which is a lot, which is a great ambition. And that's really going to be driven by BP Wind and the partnerships it's going to have there, and rolling out offshore and onshore wind, as well as solar with our solar division, Lightsource BP. So those two are really going to be busy over the next decade. And you can see further down the graph all of the planned targets across the key metrics that we're going to be tracking. This slide just shows some progress to date. And again, in terms of that transparency that I mentioned across those first 5 aims, which are around emissions reduction. So, you know, it's early days, but you can see there already is some traction across those 5. So just to summarize where BP has been and where it's looking to go. So it is undergoing quite a large pivot to more of a low carbon energy and customer focus, while still maintaining the focus on the resilient hydrocarbons and on the business value, which is going to drive the transition. Hugely important is delivering on that net zero ambition. We've screamed and shouted about it. There are metrics aligned to it. There's no going back. We are on this journey. And number 4, very important for a large organization like BP, it is still, while undergoing this transition, it's delivering that long-term value for the shareholders. So I just wanted to start with that to give you that context of just how much BP is changing and where it's going to be going, because this does put into place what I'm going to talk about next, which is the innovation ecosystem of the part of BP that I'm in, and how we look at innovation and how we look at new opportunities. So there are three units or 3 ways that we look at opportunities for innovation within the part of BP that we sit in, and we all work together and we all have our own operations. So really, it's across 3 fronts. One name in there you may recognize, which is BP Ventures. They have been around for quite a while now. They are the CVC of BP, the corporate venture capital unit. They've been around for over a decade, and they operate like most CVCs do, in that they're a strategic investor for BP, which means it gives BP access to the disruptive technologies and business model that it needs for the strategic purposes of BP. So, you know, BP has some needs that they themselves may not be able to meet or need rapidly, and it's looking for businesses that can serve those needs. And that is ultimately what BP Ventures is about. They operate with minority investments focused on high growth technology. And they have a track record. They've invested over $500 million, 40 startups. They've got 9 exits. They invest all the way from seed through to Series D, and they look for the traditional CVC exit returns model. So they were ultimately, you know, what BP had in terms of being involved with the innovation world and the startup world. But, you know, as the energy world really started changing and the climate crisis took on new legs and the new BP strategy was rolled out, you know, there's a realization that a lot more is going to have to be done to facilitate this transition to the low carbon type of business, which is going to need some more dedicated and focused innovation efforts. So that's when Launchpad and incubation came in. So just briefly, incubation is a unit that we have set up, which is for early stage ideas, concepts, pre-MVP, you know, barely formed, just ideas. And it's a dedicated program which is ran internally with the specific aim of trying to reach MVP status through rapid business model testing. So this is open to internal ideas within BP. So as we've rolled this out, you know, we have put the opportunity out there across the business for people to come forward with ideas for startups. And actually, we did have people who got seconded and left their roles within BP to come to test their idea in incubation for a number of months. So that really just does show the encouragement to actually follow through on these type of innovations. And then the idea being that the candidates that can make it through and the business models that can stand up graduate into Launchpad, which is what I'll go into next. So Launchpad was set up to build businesses at scale and at speed. So we operate on a private equity style investment model coupled with deep business building support with scaling focus. So we're a venture builder set up around 3 years ago. And we are tasked with building and scaling a portfolio of new energy businesses. Our focus is on digital adjacencies to BP. The type of stage that we look to invest at is Series A companies. They're around, but with the main focus being on their scaling potential. We operate on a majority investment model, followed with a large capital injection tied in with follow-on funding. Eventually, the exit options can be an IPO, potentially, if that makes sense, or also a trade sale back into the business, and building future business units for BP. Our timeline stretches from 3 to 5 years, but we do take a longer term timeline focused on building that portfolio revenue and strategic value. So this is sort of a visualization of how we think of these two groups and how they all operate together. So an idea can come in internally or externally, and we really look to engage across the innovation ecosystem. So internally, within BP, we have internal expert groups and R&D groups, but also externally with the ecosystem through partnerships, accelerators and incubators, the investment and VC ecosystem, along with academic relationships as well, really keeping it as broad as possible to bring in ideas and opportunities. Ideas can come in through incubation, which is what we would call 0 to 1. And then Launchpad would come in for things that make it to 1, to take it from 1 to 100, is the way we would think about it. BP Ventures can come into this in terms of a try before you buy model, in that BP Ventures may invest a minority stake in a business of which Launchpad may believe that they have the scaling potential to take it to the next level as well, which is a model that we have executed. There's just a slide here to try and articulate and show some of the differences between an accelerator, a startup studio, and a venture builder, because these are all somewhat new concepts, and they do all get mixed up. Launchpad has been has struggled with being titled as an accelerator previously, which we most definitely are not. We would fall more closely into the venture builder type of model, which you can see some of the key differences here. The number of ventures we would look to do is few. The origination of those ideas mainly come from internal, but also from external. So we can build the ideas through our incubation, as I mentioned, or from outside investment origination, which is where my role is. Generally, in that case, the corporate decides which ventures to start, and the ownership model is generally a majority, where the majority stake is owned by the corporate. The management is internal. We run it with the actual business. They have their own board and management team, but we do have a majority on that board. The funding, this comes internally, which is taken care of through seed and growth capital, which is provided by the corporate, and in this case, Launchpad. The end goal or the outcome is a new business, which fully fledged business, which ultimately can be handed over to the business unit, or spun off, or sold, as I mentioned earlier. So just a visual to try and illustrate the differences between those three scenarios. So a little bit about Launchpad and what we're about and what we're trying to do. So our mission mission statement is to generate sustainable change by scaling a portfolio of digitally led businesses and disruptive startups that reimagine energy for people and for the planet. So we're a business scaling business. That's the business that we're in. So we invest in disruptive, innovative tech that we believe can accelerate the transition. The focus is on scaling and speed up to multi-million revenues and global operations within 2 to 5 years. We aim to get them there as fast as we can, and the portfolio will play a vital role in the energy transition and in the future of BP. Our offer is threefold. So first is capital injection. We look to invest in companies that have large potential and that we can accelerate that growth path through that capital injection post the majority investment. We also then will provide multi-year funding based on milestones to allow further growth as the business needs it. The second offer, which is leveraging BP's unique capabilities. So this is a unique advantage that both the startup that we invest in would get, but also that BP would receive from an investment in this business. And these are the type of things that, when granted to a company, would allow them to accelerate rapidly, faster than they would with just the capital from a VC, for example. So those accelerating factors are things like internal customer, to sales opportunities to sell within to BP, access to data and pilots to test their use cases, domain expertise, expert guidance and feedback, as well as global partnerships. So this is access to BP's customer, partner and vendor network in 80 countries. So these things can really accelerate a startup to get them through into a growth phase. Within Launchpad itself, we have a team of experts across multiple business functions. People who have all been assembled and brought in from outside of BP, actually, myself included, to be there to serve these businesses, to help them grow wherever their needs are. So that's HR, it could be tech, it could be commercial, finance and legal. All of those fundamental building blocks are there to support these businesses to grow. Where we focus in terms of sectors, as I'm listed here. So industrial analytics, that's ultimately Industry 4.0 and all of the technologies that are involved in that. Intelligent commodities, mobility, automation, and energy as a service. So you can see they are all sort of digital and they're all sort of low carbon focused. So they're all looking to the future and to the future businesses that we can build. Our criteria, we focus on digitally enabled businesses. They are scalable and they are applicable across multiple sectors. So that's where we focus. Also, we focus on companies that have product-based revenues. This is, for us, a key sign and indicator of scalability in terms of recurring revenues. So that's a key indicator we look out for. They must be in growth markets where BP can actually provide a strategic advantage, so we can actually provide that acceleration factor, as well as the management team, which, as we all know, is crucial for any venture. Also key to our success or to our learnings is figuring out what we're not going to invest in, which what we've learned is things like chemicals, hydrogen, geothermal, heavy capex, hard tech, anything requiring a long time to commercialization. Those are the type of things we're going to leave to BP Group, and we're going to focus on the digital plays. These are some of our portfolio companies that we have. So far, it's a portfolio of 5. So we have Onyx, which is predictive maintenance for renewable energy assets. Stride, who operate in the seismic world. Finite Carbon, our most recent deal, which actually came through the BP Ventures portfolio, and Finite operate in the carbon offset and forest offset space, which was a great deal for us. And then we've more on the industrial analytics side, which is Light, who offer real-time analytics for acoustic sensing, as well as Photech, who operate in the fiber optic space with applications in smart cities. So we are planning to do 3 more deals this year. So we are definitely busy. And finally, just to bring on to some of the lessons that we've learned, at least since my time here in Launchpad. So the first lesson, and probably the most important, is that self-awareness and willingness to change is a top priority. So being willing to fail fast, I know that's almost a cliche, but it is ultimately successful, essential. All is not going to be perfect from the start. What you're ultimately going to be doing when going on an innovation venture like this in a corporate setting like we have, you're going to be leaping from hypothetical into reality, and that is never a like for like transition. There's always going to be unexpected things that happen, and the world is unpredictable. So you have to be able to adapt as you go and react as you go. We've gone through multiple changes as we've gone on. The power of micro lessons has been key for us, which is because so much of our staff has been external and we've come from other places that have built things and done things. They come in knowing what good looks like, which is allowing us then to share ideas across our team. But that has then also resulted in us being able to disseminate those ideas and best practices down into our portfolio companies. So it's all a symbiotic sharing of those micro lessons and of those failures to help us improve. Just some examples for us, when Launchpad started, we initially did also have an accelerator element where we thought we could take things from, idea stage into massive business. But over time, we quickly realized actually getting from 0 to 1 is hard enough, and that actually we would not be able to do that well as scaling from 1 to 100. So that is why the incubation and Launchpad actually separated pretty early on, because we realized that just was not going to work. So that was one example of our willingness to change rapidly. And related to that, our organizational structure had to change, because we thought that we were going to be dealing with earlier stage companies. We had set up the organization of Launchpad in that way. We had entrepreneurs in residence who were going to work very closely day to day with these companies to try and get them up and off the ground. So, really, hard work to get them from that 0 to 1. But as we realized that was not going to work and that wasn't going to be our model, we then have to shift our organizational structure to reflect that, to be set up to support the journey from 1 to 100. And again, on our investment thesis, when we started, our investment thesis was quite broad. We were looking at lots of areas. The energy world is a big place with lots of opportunity and money pumping into it. But we realized we had to be specific and we had to narrow it down, which is what we've done over time through different iterations to really get close to what we have conviction on in Launchpad as to what we think is a scalable venture. The second lesson is that culture is absolutely key to make this work, because you really are starting a whole new thing with a whole new collection of people. You're ultimately like your own startup. So culture in that is so essential. So, you have to ask yourself, what is your culture? And that has to be intentional. The culture can't just happen or be an accidental afterthought. It has to be a conscious decision that's then reinforced. So you have to ask, what values in the culture will you need for the team to be successful? What type of traits do you need? And in my view, I think these are going to have to be different from the core business. So, our values in Launchpad will have to be different from BP's core values, because, we may be doing different things. And the values that set up your culture have to be demonstrated across the team. They have to be demonstrated at the top level all the way down to the most junior, so that you get that buy-in, because culture is actually a very fragile thing. And we put a focus on it. We try and put things in place to reinforce our culture. So we have culture surveys to enable transparency. We have culture champions for people who have exhibited our culture and values. And we really do make a conscious effort to check in on them to make sure that we are all aligned. So our values, I have them down here. They are 4 values, We hustle, so we know we're doing something new, so hustling is required. Energize, which is about supporting each other. We love, which means we support each other with love through the challenging times, as well as pioneering, which again reflects the fact that we're doing something brand new and championing behaviors that reflect that. A key thing is number 3, which is, what's your why? You need a clear mission statement or reason for doing what you're doing that the team can align themselves to. And again, you need to have an ambition that's beyond those of the parent company. You need to have your own independent mission that all of the team members can align themselves to and buy into. One thing to watch out for is the varying interpretations of the why across the team. That can happen. Everyone should really have close to the same why as to why you're all there. And for us, KPIs are important for tracking that, as to keeping us all on the same page. My 4th lesson or tip is expect the challenge of internal dogma. You're doing something new, which can cause friction with any status quo, and are going to be doing things differently. So patience and diligence and pragmatism is essential to get through that initial phase and to begin to make that name for yourself. In large organizations, naturally it's going to happen that there's going to be gaps in communication, in processes and methods. Don't be frustrated by that. That's just a natural thing to happen. Core business employees, they may have limited exposure to your mission or what you're trying to do because you're new on the scene. So the solutions to that are time and spreading the word. We had this in Launchpad. As I mentioned, BP Ventures was around for a decade before us. So all of the practices that had been set up, everyone was familiar with that. But when Launchpad came in, we were operating a little bit differently, and it took some time for people to become familiar and comfortable with that. Number 5, which is essential for us, which is to be in tune with the outside world. So do not operate in an internal silo. Engage with the outside world, the startup and investor community. It's so important because it spreads your message. It builds credibility about what you're doing. It tests the assumptions that you've made, because that is what you've done. You've made some assumptions and gone out to the world. You have to be able to test and iterate that. You'll learn from others, and it's the quickest way to get to things like ideas, deals, and opportunity. So again, we did that with our Launchpad model, which is a unique model. We wanted to test it with founders and investors. So we're always being open to feedback and hearing what they think about the model, both positive and otherwise. The last tip is to scream and shout. You have to tell absolutely everybody about what you're doing, spreading the message internally, within, but also externally to the market, because no one is going to spread the word for you. You have to get out there yourself and do it. Hone your elevator pitch. Think about what's captivating or unique about what you're doing and why. People have very limited attention spans. Your whole team has to be responsible for doing this. It can't just be your marketing team. And also to celebrate success. It's easy to be tough on yourself when you're doing something new and acknowledging all those failures. It's really important to acknowledge the milestones and the progress that you make while still maintaining focus. And the last tip number 7, which I've squeezed in, is just to be positive and believe, because if you don't, you're doomed. And that is it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cathal. Wow, that was amazing. And it just felt like we went through your 3 years of journey. I can see double screen here. All right.
Sorry, coming off the screen. There we go.
That's completely fine. No problem. So we have like less than 10 minutes so that you can attend the next talks through. So just shoot in the questions, as many as you have. I'm going to first begin with Katharina's question here, which I found it very interesting, especially in the context of accelerators as well as launchpads. Talking about internal/external ideas, do you have to deal with not invented here thinking? How do you overcome it?
Dealing with non-invented thinking, as in...
Not invented here thinking.
Ah, um, not particularly. There can be elements of that, but realistically, if it's the quickest route to reaching the goal, so if there is some internal capability which is similar to that, generally what we would do is be aware of that and measure that up to what the external creation is, and place them side by side. And this has happened. BP is a big organization. They're generally looking at most things already that we bring to them. So then we have to be the ones to convince the case that it's about time to market, and being able to act rapidly, which is what we're about in that commercial facing side. So we have had to deal with that, but it is always surmountable, I would say.
Great. A question I had on this was particularly on your interaction with the ecosystem, right? So how do you actually, like, there are ideas that's coming from your incubator, which is business case proven, but how about the external ones? Like how does that engagement look like? How do you find the right one for you, the right fit for you?
Well, there's many paths to a good deal, right? As anyone in the venture world knows. So really, it's over time we've been able to really whittle down to what we think good looks like. So there's the usual investment criteria. We've a minimum amount of revenue we'd want to look at. You'd want to look at the team. All of that. All of those boxes have to be ticked. And we would look in all the usual places of events, conferences, databases. Generally, the longer you're in the energy world, everybody knows each other, and everyone's fighting for the same deals. I think for us, trying to get it across or to make it happen, the main thing is they have to buy into our model. It has to make sense for them that it's a long-term partnership. We're completely different from the VC model. It's not just taking some cash and getting some connections through BP and that being that. It's a very deep embedded relationship and long-term relationship with a founder who are always very, very protective and close to their business. So that is the main thing that we have to get through. And once that hurdle is passed, then that's when the serious considerations begin.
Very interesting. So you mentioned something about this being unlike a VC where it's an individual company. One of the checks you have is these investments you're making, it has to come back to BP as a whole unit. So, and also I heard you mentioning about having a culture on its own. So how do you see this as long-term, right? So each of the units now which you're investing in, you're encouraging to have a culture on its own. At the same time, eventually it has to come back to BP as a whole unit. How do you see that shift?
Yeah, I know it's a tricky one, right? And we haven't got there yet because we're early on in our journey. But we want to be there to build businesses for them, for those businesses themselves. So we have to serve the growth of that business. So we're there to stand it up and to help it scale with the external market. So we want to give them the tools to grow and to stand up independently. They will still have some board control, and they will still have autonomy over their culture. We don't seek day-to-day control. It's never an outright acquisition 100%, or well, most of the time, because we really want to do is set up the cap table in such a way that there is incentivization there for the founding team to stay on for the eventual exit, so that they're incentivized to build it. And in terms of the exit route, again, I mentioned we haven't gotten there yet, but we have two routes we're looking at, one of which is IPO or external. So that is an external route. So that means it wouldn't go through BP. So it doesn't mean that the eventual ending point is an acquisition by BP. If the business is particularly valuable, and we've been able to build something that really could become a part of a future business unit of BP in 5-10 years time, then it's likely that they would be the one to take that business in. So it's really what we're about is we're designed create optionality, to build valuable things that serve needs. So then when that ending point comes for an exit, it will be valuable to the external market, which gives us and BP its return, or is so valuable in terms of its use case that actually BP wishes to actually purchase it, to take it back inside. So it's optionality.
Right. There's a question from Marta. How does your equity model look like for ventures born out of internal ideas once you spin off?
Okay, so how does the sort of the share structure work across, incubation, ventures, and Launchpad?
Yeah, that's how I understood it. Yeah.
Okay. So in incubation, which we don't get into share structure, really that's just idea testing. So it doesn't get involved in there. In terms of ventures, as I mentioned, they're a minority equity investor, when they are which gives them a seat on the board. They're a strategic investor, and they would look for the usual CVC returns, their multiples. And then, in terms of Launchpad, we're majority investors, so minimum of 51%. And so in terms of transferring, or if, I think if the question is referring to, if something goes from ventures into Launchpad, really it's a trade sale. So we would just transfer those shares from the ventures portfolio into Launchpad. And so that's how that transition would work over time. And, for Launchpad, in terms of our percentage shareholding, it really can vary, depending on the business and on the value of the business and the valuation of the business as well, in terms of how much the shareholders themselves want to exit and how much we can afford. So it can really range from 51%, all the way up. So there's a variance there.
Thank you. Okay, Tony was asking this question, in fact, twice. So let's take it. One of your metrics was partnerships with cities with a goal of 10 to 15 city partners by 2030. What does this partnership look like from BP's perspective?
So this is the Region, Cities and Solutions unit, which has been recently stood up. So it's a brand new unit, and so really the aim for that unit is to be able to take the offers from other parts of the business, so our renewables business, our tradings business, to be able to offer an integrated package to cities. So that has already begun and is underway. One city that is, or one of the first cities that they're working in, is the city of Aberdeen in Scotland. So really, it involves very close working and relationship with the city in terms of what their needs are, and it's about taking a collective and holistic view as to what sort of package could be offered. So that is literally anything from energy supply, which of course we could do, but also asset implementation, whether that's solar or whether that's wind or renewables from our renewables unit, and into our trading unit as well. And then obviously that then even moves further down into our portfolio of investments, both in Launchpad and ventures. We have solutions around EVs, we have solutions around building energy management. We really have a broad spectrum of offers, and it's sort of on a ad hoc basis per city, what that would look like. So it's really about bringing in the suite of things that we have and directing them at cities and regions.
Very interesting. If you have any last questions, do use this chance to either ask over the mic or put it in the chat box. So as we are nearing the end, one question to you is, could you share a story of scaling up over the 3 years, your personal favorite, just to kind of have some nuances in your journey?
Sure. I will give one. I mean, it ultimately was not successful, but it was one where we learned a lot along the way. This was basically a personal carbon emissions tracking app. This is back when we thought that we could just start things and scale them. So we were super naive, you could almost say, where we just started this carbon tracking app, and we were failing so fast, and we had teams and teams of developers that we brought in, and we were super excited about it, and we were getting recognition about it. Even the managing director or the CEO of this startup that was brought in, when he was out for dinner with his developers, they actually saw the governor of the Bank of England at the restaurant, and they ran over to him and began to tell him about Launchpad and began to tell him about the business. And he said, "Oh, that's great. I'm meeting the BP CEO next week. Can't wait to chat to him about it." So we were just, in those early stages, we were just dizzy with excitement and, what we were doing. And we were just so enamored by the whole thing. But we learned so much with that particular venture, because we realized that while it was very exciting and it was a great space to be in, it was not going to reach the levels that we would need it to in terms of a scalable venture from a monetary perspective. Just the market wasn't there. Market wasn't there for it yet. We think it will get there, but for personal carbon tracking of emissions, they were focusing on transport at that stage. This market just wasn't developed enough yet, so we had to put it to bed, and we had to shift our focus somewhere else. But it was just great to be in that sort of innovative mindset, to be thinking about a new venture, trying something new. And then also really the learning for us was that, this isn't going to work, but why is it not going to work? And then that fed into, our new sort of investment model and our new criteria as to what are the things that we need to look for to give us a chance of success. Amazing
story. I mean, that's when we learn, right? I mean, when things go wrong, then we learn it, and these become big lessons for future for your Launchpad. Great sharing, Cathal. Was wonderful insights. I guess we have to wind it up. There are more questions in my mind, but let's hold it for another session. And thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you in another session. Until then, have a good evening or day wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.